and welcome to Money Matters TV. I'm Mike Dever, founder and CEO of Brandywine Asset Management, and my two co-hosts today are Jeff Watkinson of Watkinson Capital Partners and Eric Parnell of Great Valley Advisor Group. Oh, Eric and Jeff.
Mike, great to see you today.
Mike,
Thank
Eric,
you.
good to see you guys.
Yeah,
Good to
great,
see you,
great
Jeff.
seeing you too. Let's start out with a viewer question. Usually we talk around a little bit, but I think this might be a good question to kind of set us on pace for today's show. We have this one coming from Frank Kellerman of Philadelphia. His question is, what stocks or industries should I avoid in this new economy? Eric, why don't you take that?
No, it's a great question, and it's a tricky one because for someone like me that invests across the spectrum, there's I can find opportunity in a lot of different places, but I think a key point to keep in the back of your mind when you're thinking about investing is what is the potential for obsolescence associated with the sector or industry that you're considering investing in. And I think of a good past example of this. It was the newspaper industry. There was a time when newspaper stocks were a fantastic investment. They had low price volatility and they had predictable revenue streams because if you wanted to advertise, you had to go to the newspaper. Well, once the internet came along, instead of advertising in the newspaper, now people will advertise on platforms like Facebook or Google, the social media platforms. And I think that's a key to keep in mind as we move forward, because the creative cycle continues to move faster and faster. And we're now in an environment where artificial intelligence is playing an increasing role across all different industries. So when considering an investment decision, one of the questions you should ask is that, is this something that could potentially be obsolete in the next 5 to 10 years? It might be good for a trade, but not necessarily something you want to buy and hold.
Okay, that's interesting. My next door neighbor is the superintendent of the local school district, and this gets back to the newspapers. He said they are still required to place classified ads for new job hires in a print edition of the newspaper. That used to be what drove it. I mean, that little 2-sentence line they'd make $10 off of just drove profitability of a lot of those newspapers.
Absolutely.
That disappeared with the internet, pretty shortly after. So that's a good way to look at it. Is it essentially, are you running into the obsolescent headwind, or is there some sort of tailwind that's really driving that industry or that stock that's in that industry that you're looking at? I do have another question, and maybe Jeff, let you answer this one first. It comes out of the question that we had here from Mr. Kellerman, and that's talking about this new economy. And we mentioned AI. Do you see this as a new economy? Is something happening different today than we've seen in our careers? Is it just a shift, or is there really something new going on here?
Is this a new economy? When you start reading about AI, auto taxis, self-driven cars,
household robots,
yeah. Optimus, and then just AI alone. Google's search percentage. People are starting to use AI now, as opposed to the Google search engine, and that's growing. It's still, people still Google or do a regular internet search, but I think it's tough to gauge. I mean, things are moving exponentially, and I think you have to. Will there be a new industry? Will it be profitable? Will you make money off it as an investor? I mean, those are the questions you need to look at. And I'm really focused on the municipal bond side, and I guess I'm going to kick it right back to Eric. There's profitable industries right now, profitable sectors, but when there's emerging technology, an emerging industry, such as AI, blockchain, or even individual stocks, Eric, I mean, how do you handle how do you handle questions like that or challenges like that?
It's a great question, and I'm a big market history person. I'm always a big believer of you know where you're going if you understand where you've been. And it's interesting. I do think that we're, moving into a new phase of the economy. I don't know if I would describe it as new because there's principles that are as old as time itself when it comes to the economy. But, there's these 25-year transformations that seem to take place. If you go back 25 years ago, it was the advent of the internet, and that has been completely transformative to, sectors and industries all across the market. You go back 25 years before that, you had the personal computer and the introduction of the PC. 25 years before that, you had the mainframe computer. And these are, roughly every 25 years. You go back 25 years before that, you had the introduction of the automobile, and the mass production of automobiles, which changed transportation. You have these technological revolutions that seem to take place every 25 years. So what's taking place today? It's the widespread usage of artificial intelligence. Now, AI has existed for years, but it's really more the manifestation and the implementation that we're now seeing across all. Everybody's trying to get involved in AI in terms of their business practices. And just thinking about the last cycle, just as the internet completely transformed the way that companies do business, the way that we invest. I really expect that over the next 25 years, AI will be equally, if not even more so, transformative.
I definitely agree with that. I'm finding uses all the time for AI that 2 years ago, it just wasn't something that was easy to use. ChatGPT obviously changed that, made it easier to use, but then all the other things that are coming up, and it's getting more accurate to where you can use it for questions, you can use it for developing technology, and obviously for coding. I mean, it's just transformational, I think, for that any industry that relied on a room full of coders, engineers, programmers, whatever the industry calls them, that is definitely transformative, to where we now can get so much more done with one good person rather than having that person hand out code for people to develop. I mean, it's crazy. Another thing I found interesting is that it seems like the government, with breaking up monopolies, is always right at the transition too late. I remember, with Microsoft, let's break up Microsoft, all this and that. It was right when the internet was hitting. I mean, Microsoft was struggling to keep pace at that point. They no longer really held the same sway they had prior to the internet. And now you're seeing it with Google. The government's sitting there saying, "Oh yeah, they're too dominant in search. We got to do something about that." Google's just hanging on by their teeth right now because all these AI search engines that are popping up. I don't use Google anymore. I honestly don't. It's crazy, but I'll go to ChatGPT for a lot of the questions that I have, because I find I get where I want to be, and I get the answer a lot faster than going through Google. So I guess circling back to Frank Kellerman again, his question, new economy, it's maybe Google's still great, but I don't think it has the tailwind that it had when it came out of the gate. It's going to have, what's the next company with a tailwind? Maybe it is something like an open AI, and then companies that build up around that. How do you find those to invest in would be the next question, because a lot of those are still privately held. Are there ways to get involved in that new economy?
Mike, I think it's such a key point that you raised, and it gets to that point of obsolescence, to say who has been the leaders, who has the ability to transform, and who's going to be left behind. And that question comes up all the time, is to say, okay, artificial intelligence, AI, it's coming, and are we at a point of new economic transformation as a result? And so how to invest in artificial intelligence? And the initial instinct is for people to say, "Oh, well, I want to go and invest in the companies that are making AI." Well, yeah, okay, that's one option. But where the real opportunity is going to lie associated with artificial intelligence over the next 5 to 10 years aren't necessarily the companies that are giving the on-ramp to AI, the way that Cisco is giving the on-ramp to the Cisco Systems was giving on-ramp to the internet 25 years ago. It's going to be the companies that are going to be able to utilize artificial intelligence to significantly increase their profitability, widen their profit margins. And what companies are those? Those are the companies that have massive troves of data that they don't know how to process it right now. And artificial intelligence is going to give them their ability to process that. A good example of this is, arguably, one of the most mundane industries, the grocery store business. Grocery stores, when people go shopping, what do? Every time they hit the checkout line, they swipe that club card. What's that club card doing? It's gathering information on you as a consumer every time you go through the grocery store. That's a massive trove of data. Artificial intelligence is going to enable those grocery stores to utilize that data to increase their profitability and their profit margins.
That absolutely. I definitely think you're going to see people leveraging this data, and that's the reason. I mean, essentially, X, wasn't failing necessarily, but it wasn't doing great. Combining it with AI, XAI now, and Trump has X.com, and they're all together. Now that makes a lot of sense. It just increased the package by more than the individual parts, for sure, because you're combining all that data in Twitter, and X with the XAI capabilities. Now, a market, that we're all in, obviously, with investing and finance. But Jeff, I would think there's a lot of just massive amounts of data with bond market and muni bonds, especially as well, because there's just so many different offerings out there. Is that something that can be? Is your business? Would it be better if you just went into some sort of a data management, data provider, giving people the picks and shovels instead of trying to sell bonds itself? I mean, who's doing that in your industry? There's got to be value.
There are a lot of AI firms right now. The official statement. Do you want to sleep well tonight? I mean, try to read an official statement for each municipal bond offering. It's 200-300 pages. Go to page 79 to see, whatever. And AI, there's a lot of providers, upstart, new companies who are going through all this information. There's even a company out there, it's like Talk to the Bond, and it's a chat box. And when's the call date? Is there an extraordinary redemption? Like, what are the key points of this offering, of this structure that I should know? And it's using AI to go through those 300 pages of text. That's AI is working on that. It's working on pricing of a municipal security, of a bond. It's fascinating stuff. What's the bond worth? Should it be worth? I mean, there's a lot of information coming out, and they're all trying. I'm actually doing a new companies going through their website and like, you think this would work? How does this work? Would you use this? I mean, I'm not getting paid for it, but they're just trying to bounce ideas off of me.
Yeah, and I see all that as sort of that's like a first use of AI for this stuff. Ultimately, you don't really care what the terms are. You just have a goal you want. I want some portion of my portfolio to yield these types of returns and be, subject to these types of risk or avoid these types of risk. And then it goes out there and it doesn't tell you the terms on the bonds. It just selects them for you based on what your criteria is, what you're trying to accomplish in the end in your portfolio, right? I see it kind of evolving that way. Where it starts, it's parsing data and it's summarizing, but ultimately it starts just doing it for you. The actual investment it keeps moving upstream. Today it replaces the lower level programmer. As it evolves, you're telling it an end goal, and it's just developing the entire web presence for you, for example, or research platform or portfolio. And that goes to my question now here to Eric. Eric, when are you and me and Jeff obsolete? When are what we're doing, not on this show, because nobody can match that, but I mean, what are we doing in our jobs that can't be AI'd?
No, it's such a good question, and it's a debate that's been going on for a little while now with artificial intelligence. Is that, do we run the risk? I mean, we all saw the movie The Terminator, back when it came out in the 1980s, and that's basically some of the things that we're seeing come to manifest itself now. Is that, do we run the risk by creating computer technology that is smarter than us as humans to make ourselves obsolete? And, that's a legitimate concern, but that's not the tendency that takes place when we see these types of transformations in the past. You think about the personal computer. Did it put certain people out of work? Absolutely. I mean, there's not a lot of people sitting at a typewriter anymore typing out memos because we have personal computers that can do that with such greater efficiency. But what did that enable? That enabled people who were used to sit at the typewriters. It freed up their time to do more value-added work. I think we'll see the same exact thing for artificial intelligence. And Mike, you alluded to it at the beginning of the show, and Jeff, you alluded to it in terms of municipal bond research. The ability to process information so much faster that used to take us copious amounts of time, we can do it in a matter of seconds. It frees up our time to take the value-added work that we're able to do up another level. And that's the key to these transformations that we've seen in the past. Just like with the internet, it put information at our fingertips. Artificial intelligence is going to give us information processing at our fingertips, which is going to enable us to be more productive and more profitable as a result.
Okay. And I'm on your side. I'm not the alarmist. I know, like Elon Musk, and others are out there saying it's going to put people out of work. It's going to be, we got to figure out what to do. I don't know. I feel like the market figures itself out. And if somebody was a programmer and they got put out of work, they're going to find something else that's suited for what their skill set is in a different place, different level, whatever it might be. That's just what always happens. I don't think it's so transformative that we're all, maybe unfortunately, and I don't view it as a risk, I view it as an opportunity, but that we're all sitting on the beach and drinking Mai Tais. You got to have the little umbrella, and everybody else, the computers are running the world and doing everything for us. I don't know. I just feel like there's always going to be something then that humanity comes up for their purpose in life, and it's not just sitting on the beach drinking Mai Tais.
I think
That's my belief.
I think of the state of Alabama. I mean, state of Alabama was highly dependent on the textile industry back in, leading all the way up to the 1970s. But then the textile industry went abroad. And, if you take a look at their clothing labels, the clothes come from some of the most exotic places in the world. So what happened in the state of Alabama? They adjusted, they created incentives. The automobile industry came, certain technology sectors came to the state. And as a result, people living in the state have higher value added, better growth type jobs than what left before. And that's part of kind of the creative destruction, is the transformation to say, okay, what can we do new? What can we do better? And what skills do we need to bring in order to do that? And, thinking about that, and I actually have a question for Jeff, going back to the municipal bond space. One of the things with artificial intelligence is the need for power and the need for electricity and the need for infrastructure in terms of delivering that energy to the companies that are locating to use that artificial intelligence. Do you see that as a potential opportunity for the municipal bond space in terms of, local municipalities or states, issuing new bonds in order
It's going to cost a lot of money to build that out.
That's a good question, Eric. And I have been thinking about that. And it's kind of the picks and shovels approach to AI, which is the old gold rush example. Don't buy the miners, buy the people supplying the picks and shovels to the miners. And obviously power, nuclear power, the need for more power generation in this country as compared to China. Municipal bonds really serve, the people, the residents. I mean, they're monopolistic. They're ultra safe. They have monopolistic characteristics. That might be more the private sector. I haven't really looked into it, but I on the municipal side, I know there's a lot of publicly and private companies who are trying to provide that power source, the obscene amount of power needed for cloud storage and AI and to run these data centers. I'm not really sure what role the municipal bond market is going to play to provide power to an AI
So
company right now.
you don't see the municipalities issuing bonds to fund a project to maybe attract some of these users into their area? Would that be a
I
something that
mean,
they do?
that would be really forward thinking. I mean, I don't. I don't. I haven't seen any like new deals in the power space per se, um,
Hmm.
to fund something like that. I'm not an expert in these other power generation companies that are. I mean, we need more power in this country compared to what
Right.
China's producing, and we're rapidly behind. Excuse me, we're very far behind. And I don't know if that's the role of the municipal bond market to provide that financing for a corporate AI structure, unless it is part of our infrastructure, unless it is an essential service. Um,
I get that.
that's a good question.
Yeah, no, I don't know that it's something that municipalities should be getting involved in. Just curious as whether we're seeing that. And some of the numbers I'm seeing are just in the next 5 years, maybe 10 max. We're going to go from 4% of energy use, electricity use to run data centers to 14, 16, maybe even more with these projections you have for AI. One thing that I know is going to happen that's not factored into that as well, though, is that it'll become more efficient. There, what we're doing, that's just how the world works. What we're doing today and the amount of energy we're using to produce one AI output, that's going to get more efficient. That's going to change over time. So don't know why or how, but somebody's going to develop that because there's money to do that. They'll make money if they do that. I have a question that both of you, I'm curious with this because there's a lot going on right now, and politically, it's hard to even talk about it because people jump on you one way or another. I just want to know, in general, does it benefit the country to reshore these jobs? I look at it, and I'm a little bit confused why we want to do it. So I guess I'll have an opinion there. Why we want to beat up Vietnam and bring whatever Vietnam's providing us at low cost back to the U.S. and produce it at a higher cost. Sewing shoes or whatever it might be. You mentioned the fashion industry, textiles, whatever, and in the South, Eric. And I mean, do we miss it? Or are we better off that we replace it with something that's new economy? That's maybe there are better jobs. Maybe they're not. Maybe those were great jobs, and I just don't know. But my curiosity there by really manipulating the market and the environment is it going to make it so that we have better jobs in the United States, or are we just going to have different jobs in the United States?
I mean, it's interesting because the shoe industry isn't coming back to upstate New York. The furniture industry isn't going to come back to North Carolina. The textile industry isn't going to come back to Alabama, not in a macro sense. Where I do think that there's merit is in the micro sense. And this was something that was happening long before, we've led up to today. There are certain companies, there was a big push to offshore production, to offshore, production of component parts. And in some cases that worked fantastically well for companies. In other cases, it didn't. It led to more, production assembly line disruptions because there was a part that they used to make in-house and they shipped it off to Mexico. And if that part's defective, it shuts down the assembly line for 3 weeks. So that's an adjustment process. It's not about bringing the old jobs back to the United States, but bringing the right jobs back to the United States and bringing new jobs to the United States that make sense to exist here, not only from a profitability standpoint and figuring out a way that we can make them competitive here in the United States, but also from a national security perspective. There are certain things that we've outsourced to other countries, and COVID was kind of the wake-up call for this, to say, hey, you know what? Having this production coming from overseas, if the global economy shuts down, that's a real problem. Or worse yet, if we look out over the next 10 to 20 years, if the threat of geopolitical conflict continues to rise, well, then there's a merit for having that production take place here. But it's not about bringing the old industries back as much as it is figuring out what are the new industries that we need to have here more of going forward.
Okay. Yeah, it's a, to me, been a very kind of open question on, with 4% unemployment, what are we trying to accomplish? What do we want to do? What in bringing more jobs back into the country? Um, Overall, I mean, I think you need to have fair play in world trade. We clearly have not had fair play in world trade. And so I love that that's now being raised as an issue in a very aggressive fashion. I think ultimately you want that combined with the right places making the right products. I think Warren Buffett said it great at his annual meeting. Let people do what they're good at. And right, I don't see us bringing in a macro sense sewing shoes to New York or furniture industry in North Carolina, but there'll be pockets that where it might make sense. But at the same time, don't stop us from doing what we're good at doing and selling a product somewhere else. That could benefit from our expertise. Okay, we hit a lot of areas here. I like it. I do want to bring up something to kind of circle back. Beginning of the show, question we had that really guided a lot of what we're talking about here with new economy and everything. And I just want to make sure that other people know how you can send your questions in to Money Matters TV as well.